So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie Filippetti. I'm the Executive Director of the Vandenberg Coalition, and I'm very excited to be here today with Congressman Pat Fallon as part of our Future of Conservative Foreign Policy series. So the purpose of this series is to really highlight those members of Congress that are coming up with new strategies and approaches to American foreign policy, and also to show that within the conservative space, there's a lot of different viewpoints, and we want to make sure that we can help align on the most effective approaches. Congressman Fallon currently represents Texas's 4th Congressional District in Northeast Texas. He is a member of the House Armed Services Committee, where he serves as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Military Personnel. He is also a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Accountability. Prior to his time in the House, he served on the Texas State House and Senate, and before that, he was a successful entrepreneur, founding over a dozen companies. His career of service began straight out of college, where he was commissioned in the Air Force and has been a staunch advocate for U.S. national security. And what I think is most interesting about your bio is that Congressman Fallon is one of only 15 people ever to complete the World Marathon Challenge, where he ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, which he did to raise funds and awareness for pediatric cancer research. So I have a lot of questions about Antarctica, but I'm not going to ask those. But thank you so much for joining us today.
The indigenous population of Antarctica is very friendly to the United States.
Okay, so obviously most people are most interested in learning about Iran and your thoughts on Iran. But before we get into that, I wanted to mention that you also played football for Notre Dame's 1988 national championship team. And that was under Coach Lou Holtz, who we learned actually recently passed away just yesterday. Yeah. So sending my condolences to you.
Thank you very much.
You wrote a really moving tribute about Coach Holtz. And I also came across this quote that's attributed to him: "It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it." So I'd love to hear your reflections on what you've applied from Coach Holtz in your service as a member of Congress, as well as how you think the United States is currently carrying our load.
You know, when you're talking about this, you know, Coach Holtz was a great American and a national treasure. And it's very hard. It hits you hard when you hit a stage in your life. Life's about chapters. And when you get to my age, one of the chapters is you lose your parents. And it's very sad. So for those of you, if you could do me a favor that still have your parents, reach out to them tonight and call them and tell them you love them. Because there's some of us in this room that can't do that any longer. And I'm unfortunately hit that chapter. So when Coach Holtz passed yesterday, it's kind of one of the last in the generation that was born in the 1930s. And he just had such an impact on all of our lives. I got to introduce him at the convention in Cleveland in 2016 at a pro-life luncheon. About 4,000 people were there. And I wrote him a letter, and I remember the letter. I said, "Coach, I've written this in my head 1,000 times, but this is the first time I put pen to paper." And I gave him, it's a 3-page letter, just telling him how much he meant to me. And I gave it to him. We were sitting at different tables, and I went up to introduce him. And as I was going up to introduce him, I noticed that he was reading the letter right then and there. And his face was like this, and he went, and he smiled, and that was really touching. And then, of course, he's very clever, and I went a little bit too long in my introduction, and he got up there, and he had a lisp, you know, and he said, "I got to tell you something about Pat Fallon. Pat, that was a great introduction, and heck, I could have listened to it all day." And he looks at his watch. And I thought I was going to have to. But, you know, we were talking about it and kind of blending his advice, his life advice, that we could talk. I could probably teach a 3-credit college course on everything that he taught us. So in the interest of time, I will say that we were blending his philosophy with politics. And I said, you know what? Diversity doesn't make us stronger. Adversity makes you stronger. For you personally, I just kind of coined that, and I thought, that is what it is. You're not going to be a great captain of a ship if you always sail in smooth seas. And it's not the obstacles that are the things that you should be apprehensive about or be ready and go, "Oh, well, there's an obstacle, I better not go down that path." Guess what? The obstacle is the path. That's what the Lord puts in our way so we develop and we grow. And we always want to go to the comfortable. I see this with politicians, more on the amateur side. They'll get in a room like this, and who do you gravitate to? You gravitate to the people that you already know. It's in human instinct. Oh, if I know someone, I see a friendly face, that's comfortable, that's safe. But as a politician, if you're running for office, That's the dumbest thing you can do. That you go and say, hey, how are you? 1 second, and then you go to the people that you don't know, and you introduce yourself. And you really need to take that into account. And I see a lot of young people here, and that gives me a lot of warmth, and I'm glad it's enthusiastic. We need enthusiastic, youthful participation. But remember that you have to get outside your comfort zones because you grow that way. If you don't do that, you're never going to grow. So just a little life advice for Coach. From Coach Holt.
Speaking of getting outside of our comfort zones, Iran, was that a good transition? It felt a little forced, but.
Very
okay, so obviously, as we all know now, on February 28th, President Trump joined Israeli forces in Operation Epic Fury, which has already successfully taken out the Ayatollah in Iran. What is your view of this operation, and what do you expect will come next?
It's a great question. Again, another three critical course probably for 4 months and what's happened. The president made this decision, and we just got out of a 2+ hour briefing in the SCIF on the Intel Committee. So a couple of things that we need to understand is look at, when we hit them approximately 8 months ago and hit the nuclear facilities. And since what has happened from that point to down today, or before we struck them again, they were still completely committed to their ballistic missile program. They were still completely committed to their uranium enrichment, and they were still completely committed to eventually weaponizing and going nuclear. They hadn't moved. You hit them that hard, and they don't move at all. So really, in my humble opinion, what the president did was he made a decisive decision to eventually we're going to have to act. If they're committed to being a nuclear power, and every president, Republican and Democrat, has said, we can't ever let that happen. Remember when they asked Kamala Harris, or whatever, I can't pronounce her name, and they get mad at me when I pronounce it wrong. Remember Vice President Harris that lost? Remember that woman? She said when they asked, what do you think about Iran? And her epic response was, doubt. That's literally all she said. And then they asked Joe Biden, and he was kind of out to lunch, and he said, down. And President Trump, he didn't talk, he acted. And that's the thing. He might have alleviated that burden of decision from a future president, right? Because was it going to be later in his administration, or was it going to be under the next president or the president after that? We were going to have to deal with that thing because they weren't going to go away. So in that context, see, the Democrats are trying to split hairs about, well, how far away were they from a nuclear weapon? The president said X, and it was really Y and all that. First of all, I'm not going to get into the minutia of that. I can't, and that wouldn't be wise for the nation. But be that as it may, they were still committed. And so he acted. And now that he has acted, in answer to your question, we need to win. So what is a win? What's a win look like? It is one of two things. It's either the regime actually changes, or a Venezuelan model where they change to a degree where it's in a better position vis-a-vis our interests. And Venezuela and Iran are different hemispheres, different side, and they're different in more ways than they're similar. But that would also be a win. And what does that look like moving forward is going to be very interesting. But the Islamic Revolutionary Guard needs to be neutered, which means a lot of them need to be killed, because these are the true believers. They're very well armed. They're very well motivated, and they're well trained. And they're not just going to go away. And that's not going to just be bombs. It's going to have to be boots on the ground, not necessarily American boots on the ground, but the Iranian people, 70 to 80% of the people hate that regime. They need, at the right time, at the right moment, to stand up and take our country back.
You recently were doing a media hit where you're talking about this incident in an Austin bar where there were 2 Americans that were killed, likely inspired by the support for the Iranian regime. What is your advice to Americans who are concerned about potential retaliation, whether it's sleeper cells or individuals who might use this as a cause to attack Americans? We
need to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. What I hate to see in the Intel Committee at large is is this on? Can you hear me? It's on? Okay, it doesn't seem like it's on. Is it on? I have this tendency to just want to do this, but I know we're filming. What we need to do, and what drives me crazy about the Intel Committee, is when they assess threats, sometimes they'll say, well, we don't have any evidence of this. Okay, but if you are our adversary or enemy, how would you hit us? That's how I want to prepare, and prepare for those contingencies. Is there going to be someone else in a country of 340 million people that may act either as a lone wolf because they're sympathetic to the regime, or they've been trained by the Iranians in some form or fashion? That is possible. So we all need to be vigilant. There's 340 million sentinels, if you will, would be the ideal scenario, where we're all a little bit more.
I don't think that's us. I think that's, yeah.
But that we're all more guarded now, particularly the people that work here on that hill. And when you're ferrying back and forth from this building to that one in somewhat of business attire, whether you have one of these pins on or not, you probably work on the hill. So we all need to be looking over our shoulder just to be safe. You'd rather be safe than sorry. That could certainly happen. I pray that it doesn't. But also in a greater context, we're a country of immigrants. But when we let people into this country, we have to do it, and when this is the criteria we should use. Not a lottery system, which is the dumbest way you could possibly do it, but is this individual going to make the country stronger? Or are they going to make us weaker? And if they're going to make us weaker, you can't come in. But if you're going to make us stronger, absolutely and welcome. Because there's a lot of immigrants that make us wildly successful. And you have billions of people literally want to come to the country. Let's take the world's best. And success and talent and skill comes in all shapes, sizes, and shades. We know that, we accept that, we embrace that, and that's the way we should act from a policy perspective.
I'm going to pivot away from Iran, but though if you have other questions, I encourage the audience to ask them. I want to ask about Russia. So this is another ongoing conflict. President Trump had threatened the Ayatollah that if he didn't negotiate in good faith, then something negative would happen to him, which I think we've seen.
And if he was going to kill protesters, which he did.
Oh, that's right. And it's very clear that Vladimir Putin is also refusing to engage in good faith in terms of the Russian-Ukraine war. What do you want the United States to do going forward to ensure that Putin takes these peace talks seriously?
Which he didn't when the president offered him the off-ramp and then went to Alaska. The president at that time was acting in good faith, and clearly Vladimir Putin was not. The difference, as we all know, between a country, a nation state like Iran and Russia, is Russia has 5,000 nuclear weapons. And there are some things we have these academic exercises where if they didn't have nukes, what would happen if there was a conventional incursion where we went in, boots on the ground, into Ukraine? Well, yeah, if that happened, the war would be over in 3 to 4 weeks if we put 100,000 American troops in Ukraine. But we're never going to do that when they have 5,000 nuclear weapons. That's why, you can act with more latitude in other nation states. So what should happen going forward, if I was the president, say, national security advisor, what I would recommend that he do is beef up and not take away from our Eastern European posture, but beef it up, because that could be used as a negotiating chip moving forward. And it's something that's good. I just came back from a Codel to Bulgaria and Romania, and all our Eastern European allies want to see a stronger United States presence because they know the bear. Whether it's a communist one, a czarist one, or now an authoritarian one, that bear has teeth and that bear has claws and that bear is hungry and it's got an insatiable appetite. So that's why there are some of our best allies now. I mean, look at Poland. Mm-hmm. Holy hockey. I mean, Poland's country, 40 million people, economy's blazing. And if you had an alliance with a free Ukraine, say 10 years from now, in peacetime, 40 million, Poland, 30 million, Romania, 20 million. You see what I'm saying? That's going to counter 150 million nation Russia because their population is already crested and it's collapsing every day. So the president could put some economic squeeze on them with secondary sanctions because it's really China. Without China, I don't think the Russians could be in a position where they've had a war for 4 years. They're playing a game of attrition. They've lost, as you can see in an open source, what the casualties are, high. Very high, like startlingly high. And it's in their interest. This is the thing when you peel back the onion. So why is Putin doing this and why has he stayed on this course for 4 years? It's all about the domestic audience. As a dictator, because that's what he is, he needs about 2/3 or better of the Russian populace to support him. And if he does, he's very safe from a coup. Because who's going to take out a guy that's that popular? You're dead if you do that. You're not going to be the successor. You're going to be dead even if you succeed. But if it drops to 50% or below, that gets dangerous for any dictator, where people are like, hey, get this away. We're sick of this guy. Then he's got the oligarchs that are billionaires. Most of them are wildly rich, and they live a billionaire lifestyle. They want to go back to, the Mediterranean and see their Italian girlfriends, or their French ones or whatever. And they got a lot of yachts in that lake and a whole bunch of other things. And I say that facetiously with the lake, but that's what the Mediterranean had been. That's kind of a Russian oligarch lake. They want to live that lifestyle, and they haven't been able to do it for 4 years. So the cheese, or there's mold on that cheese, if you will. They want to wrap it up. But Putin, how does he get out of that? And I think the president had he was on the right course. And if I could just touch on this one last thing. On the Intel Committee, we had meetings a year or so ago with high-level Ukrainian intelligence officials, and then a separate meeting with high-level military officials. It was outside the SCIF. It was more confidential and not classified. So I can share with you some of the questions that I'd asked them. And one of them was, to both groups separately, met about a couple weeks apart, what does peace look like for you? Because it's one thing for an American, to be dictating, if I were there, this is how peace would be achieved. What does it look like for you? They both said something very interesting, that neither group expected to get any territory back that the Russians already occupied. They didn't even think that was feasible. Now, would they love to get some back? Yes, but they didn't even think that's something that they should seriously be negotiating with. And they want peace. So with their country say 80% intact, that's going to probably be what the new free Ukraine looks like. But one of my Estonian friends said to me, he said, Pat, nobody unites NATO quite like Vladimir Putin. And that's the truth,
So as a student of history, and one of the things that combines all of these threats is this issue of defense spending and how important it is that we meet our military objectives by spending the appropriate amounts. President Trump has put forward a $1.5 trillion budget, I believe. Obviously, there's a lot of negotiations to be had here, but how would you advise, and what do you hope that money gets spent on?
Chairman Mike Rogers, who's an absolute gold coin for our republic, he is in the position as chair of the Armed Services Committee of his best and highest use for the republic. Okay, and he had a chart that he showed his subcommittee chairs, of which I'm one. There's 7 of us, and it had the military spending, not in dollar amounts, or not adjusted for inflation, but just as merely a percentage of GDP. And we are at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. That really surprised even me, and I'd been on the committee for maybe 4 years at that point. And I said, interesting, that's the way. He goes, trust me, that's the way I'm going to position it with the president. The cat's out of the bag now. And when you look at it in that context, we're in a smaller and ever more dangerous world. Look at what happened in Wuhan. Mm-hmm. It ground our economy to a halt and killed, a few million Americans? So we are and we have to take that, because if we don't lead, who is? And I'm going to tell you exactly who it is. It's going to be Beijing, because Thailand and other countries are going to start cutting in countries in Africa, all over the world, will cut deals with Beijing and get the best deal they can. Mm-hmm. If they think the American century is waning, and the American century was the 20th and it won't be the 21st. And that's yet to be determined. It can certainly have another Pax Americana for another whole 100 years if we play our cards right. It's up to us as Americans.
You've also talked about how it's not just military spending. It's also we need to be able to produce weapons more quickly, as we're learning from Ukraine. What are the other lessons that we're learning from these ongoing conflicts about what the United States needs to do to deter China?
That the conflict of tomorrow looks nothing like even the conflict of right now. It's changed so much. 20 years ago, one of the safest places to be on a battlefield was in a main battle tank. Anybody want to take that job now? No, thanks. And then they're expending ordnance with drones to take out one singular soldier. They will dispatch a drone, because that's how efficiently and cheaply they're making drones to kill one. They usually wouldn't throw artillery at one sole soldier. It'd have to be something more that's clustered there. So it's a very different way to fight. I just had a meeting today with one of our mid-tier defense contractors, and they are doing some spectacular things with ballistic missiles. They're producing them far cheaper, far more quickly, and they're more powerful. They're taking a cost of, say, a ballistic missile that would cost $4 or $5 million down to $250,000. That's a game changer, and they can do it quickly. And they're talking about a capacity where, I'm not going to get into our magazine depth or anything, but let's just say moving forward what it could look like. They could have the capacity to produce 25,000 ballistic missiles, just them. And they could have, and this is very feasible within 2 years or so, to have 5 or 6 other manufacturers with that capability. That's a major deterrent for Beijing and others to say, heck, the Americans could just hammer us and still have 150,000 in the tank. Wow, much different than saying if you had, I'm just making this number up, but 5,000 and you expend 3,000, you're suddenly, could you manage two conflicts synchronously, and probably not.
Another challenge that you pointed to, especially in your role in the subcommittee for military personnel, is the fact that I think 77% of Americans are not qualified for military service. Why is that, and how do we correct for that?
There's many reasons why, and you look into it and you ask it. Some of them seem silly, but they're true. You need bone density. And you go, what the hell are you talking about, Pat Fallon? What are you talking about bone density? Well, when I was growing up, and when some of these people in this room was growing up, not to pick on you, you and me and some others, what did we do when we were kids, when you were 11 years old? I know one thing you didn't do. You didn't play Pong. You didn't have any damn video games. You went out and used your body and you ran around. We played free-me, we played wiffle ball, we were tackle football, we were boom, boom. And every single step you take builds your body, builds your bones, and you have greater and better cardio. And we ate better too, and then they threw some things in the food supply on again too, like corn syrup and trans fats. And I almost did my Trump impression. Very bad. But you know, you have to watch out for that. So I see it with my sons, and that's why you, as parents, you've got to make sure your children play sports to compel them to have that 2-3 hours where they're out. And and you develop leadership skills, you develop social skills, because you're going to have defeats and you're going to have victories. Do you handle your victory graciously? Do you handle your defeat, you know, with honor, that kind of stuff. So a lot of that went away. And then, God almighty, with the addictive reels. Yeah. I didn't even know what a reel was until 2 years ago.
And you were better off not knowing.
I know. I wish I had known. It drags you in, and then you have to go cold turkey and say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to read my books. So we were engaged in a lot of reading and such like that. So that's one big reason, because you see it with the military, with the figures when they have injuries with basic trainees. And they're getting these stress fractures that just weren't a thing 20 and 30 years ago. So that's just a kind of a generational shift. You're really never going to go back on it. But what you need to have Americans, pardon?
That's big.
Yeah, well, it's a big one, and it's not a good one.
No, it's absurd that the soldiers are getting these fractures.
Yeah, we wouldn't have, because, you know, gravity, you know, strength. Gravity's your friend. Hit the weight room. You know, don't be soft. And when I was 48 years old and I run those marathons, I was a 48-year-old guy, and I came back from the marathons, and just for kicks and giggles, I wanted to see how fast I could run a mile. Now, this isn't right now. This is a couple years ago. But I ran it in 5 minutes and 41 seconds as a 40-year-old guy, 210 pounds, flying. It's just the way in which we do things. Yeah. You know, and when I go to the gym, I've always been natural. I never did steroids or anything like that, ever. Not even peptides now. And I like going on the bench, and I always try to pick out a guy that's like 30, ask if he could spot me when I go on and I do my 2 1/4, how many times I can do it, because that's what you do on the combines. And when you can, rail it up 15 times, and you look at him and go, how about that, 57 years old, all natty, baby. And he's like, holy shit. It's just different. So with that, but also politically, when you have a major party, and we only have 2 of them, and a major part of that party is telling people that the United States isn't even worth fighting for. Yeah. That is poison. That is toxic. Yes, we are. We're the greatest country history has ever known. And as Lincoln said, and he knew this 160 years ago, we're the world's last and best hope. Yeah. You got to fight that with every fiber of your being. What else is there? It's like, okay, a lot of young people here. How many of you were raised by perfect parents? Are your parents here?
Mine were pretty close. I will say mine were very close, but.
But how many of you were raised by great parents? Yeah, I see a lot more hands in the room. We are not a perfect country, nor will we ever be. But that doesn't mean we're not a great country. And that's what the left has done and twisted, is to say, look at all these ills and mistakes the United States has made along its journey. Well, of course. Oh, stolen land is the one that I want to choke people out on. Some of the far left, they're very angry and unhappy people, and they kind of look like this with the angry. We had stolen land. It's awful.
Well,
there is no such thing as stolen land. It's land, and sometimes people take it. And every continent and every history, you take what you can get. And now we've kind of settled into the post-World War. These lines are permanent. That's it. Okay, sorry for I get off the soapbox.
Well, one of the entities that is pushing this anti-American propaganda and sort of making young people hate themselves and hate America is the CCP. And you actually wrote a great piece about this last fall, about the rise of Marxism in the United States and how it's really being promoted by the CCP and sort of its ideological influence campaign. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about A, what they're doing, and B, what we can better do to help counter that, to help people understand and appreciate exactly what you're saying, that America is worth fighting for.
China plays the long game. We know that. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people were trying to determine what's the best path forward in our relations with China. And many thought, and I think reasonably so at the time, that if we invite them into the World Trade Organization, we integrate their economies into the world economy, that they'll become more liberalized, and then it'll just be better for them and for us. They'll taste capitalism, their middle class will demand, and decentralization to some degree, and the exact opposite happened. Xi Jinping has consolidated power greater than any Chinese leader since Mao. And it's a dangerous place now. You go, I have very good friends that do a lot of importing, and I just talked to one of them a few months ago, and he goes, I don't even like going to China anymore. It's not fun. It's fundamentally differently than it was even 15 years ago. And so for them, in a closed society, it's very easy for them to manipulate our open society. They're also aware with the history. They look back with a long vision across the horizon, but they also look forward very patiently, right? And then they say, well, how do we take down the United States when they took on Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany at the same time and they won? Very powerful country, particularly when we're united. Key. Make sure we can divide them, weaken them from within. And the Chinese philosophy has been, for the last 20 years, particularly under Xi Jinping, I almost said Mao, because very similar people, with Xi has been, wait America out, and we want to divide as much as they can, because then we just get weaker every day to throw in that poison and that toxins. And what better way to support leftist groups? I don't think that any country fears the American left. I mean, our allies do, because it gets us weaker. But the ones that are adversaries, they welcome it. They realize that they're useful idiots. You'll see some of the members in this building, or one of these office buildings, with flags. I have American flag, Texas flag, POW flag. Boop, that's it. I'm Irish and Italian. You're not going to see those flags. No. You'll see members with the Palestinian flag. They're Gazaholics. That's what I call them. Okay? And the LBGTQ, QIC, ABC, TPDQ, whatever the hell it is. Okay? With the brown stripe and I guess in the trans stripe, I don't know. But there's all these new stripes. And I'm thinking, Palestinian flag and the LGBTQ flag. That's interesting. Because I think if you went to Gaza and you had that flag and you walked down the street with it, I think that you'd go to the rooftop party up the stairs and you wouldn't need an elevator to get down, because they'd throw your ass off the roof. Okay, so that's absurd. They are useful idiots for the decay of this country. And that's what what did Carter say, the malaise? That's the Chinese way. They want the decay and the malaise of the United States. This is in their plan, they continue to get stronger. They're teaching Chinese children that the Han, which is I think 94% are ethnically Han, that they're destined to rule the world. And what are we teaching our kids? All the ills in the United States and not the glory of this majestic republic. I'm all for teaching history in context, not just cherry pick all the bad stuff. Pick it, talk about it in context. Slavery is, the greatest, thing that we got wrong, and we ended it. The Brits ended it. The Ottomans were still practicing. Many people in Africa were still practicing long after we got rid of it, because it had been a human institution. And let's just talk brass tacks. Why'd slavery end? Why do you think? Just because it got suddenly more moral? Or was it because we didn't need it anymore anyway? Because machines could do that, and we evolved quicker. Did you know the British just paid off their debt for ending slavery from 1833? They paid off the debt in 2016. You didn't hear about that, did you? It's fascinating that because they compensated the slave owners, and then they had to pay that debt. It took that long. So just again, in context.
We have time for a couple of audience questions, if anybody has any that they would like to ask, and my colleague Ethan will take the mic.
He was the first hand.
Yeah, Brady put his hand up real quick, so just wait for the mic, Brady, and then.
Well, hello. Yeah, thank you for coming. Up the boat. So I have this question. Isn't too in the weeds, but it is not Iran, of course. So it's about the rumors, reports of that Trump plans to arm Kurdish groups, both inside Iran and then in Iraq to go into Iran. I've heard a lot of concern, especially among the Iranian diaspora, who are, be much more patriotic, where they're afraid of the territorial integrity of Iran breaking up, and like so there's fears that the currency of it there is spread across 4 different major countries. If we support them, and that essentially makes enemies out of those 4 countries. So, do you see the wisdom in that move? Are you really concerned? What would your position be?
I'm going to answer this with protecting the integrity of the skiff. Okay. How is the regime going to fall? There's a myriad of different ways, but let's talk about realistically. How can we get, or either fall or a significant change in their outlook vis-a-vis, the geopolitical landscape? You can't have the same gang in there now. We killed the top several scores of them. It's a country of 93 million people. And you don't want those to be replaced. So how do you do that? You're going to have to arm some groups. You're right in so much as with the Kurds only being 7% of the population as a whole, you need Persians. I'm saying just from an ethics standpoint, you need Persians to lead the way to have a fundamental and substantive change in Tehran. The Kurds aren't going to do it, nor could they, but they could be a part of it. And that's what I think would be, and I'm not privy to the strategy, so I can just speculate, but we're going to arm as many people on the ground, I would believe anyway, this is what I would do moving forward, as possible, because you're going to have to get rid, and with air power, you can multiply, right? You can have a force multiply. Remember with the Northern Alliance, they were a small group, I think 15% of the territory in Afghanistan. And with air cover, they did great things with just like special forces. You saw a small American footprint of the ground. And now that Iran is being dumb enough to hit their neighbors, their strategy doesn't, I don't know why the heck they do that. Maybe it's a lack of command and control, but they're not making their neighbors happy. They're making them angry. Like with Hitler, he would bomb civilian targets in Britain, thinking it would break their spirit, and what happened? The exact opposite. It strengthened their will. And this is something that they don't like getting hit like that. And that would be very helpful in a change moving forward. We'll see if they continue to go along that way. But no, I think there's an element in the press that is hypercritical. And listen, everybody has a reason to be reticent and circumspect when we get into a conflict with a nation of 93 million people that have a certain weapons depth. But when you're CNN and others that give the American people half a story, always exaggerate a little kernel that they might have heard from 1 or 2 sources just to make the administration look bad, the plan is hopeless, how could we ever do that kind of stuff. That doesn't serve our nation's interest well, nor does it serve in the interest of truth either. So a good question, though.
Other questions? Yes, right back there.
Thank you for taking time to be here, Mr. Fallon. So last year, the president sent his skinny budget to Congress. The skinny budget had $892 billion for the Department of Defense with an assumption for reconciliation of $150 billion. How do we fill the delta? So we fund through reconciliation, OB3, $150 billion worth, 1.05 for the Department of Defense, for 050 Defense. How do we meet this delta of $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion without a second reconciliation package and still maintain the Republicans' rhetoric of fiscal responsibility? What programs do we actually need to cut to come up with $500 billion for fiscal year 2026 or 2027?
So that's a great question, and it's a fair one. And if you didn't ask it in quite that manner, I was going to throw that in there because it's something we need to talk about. I am a fiscal hawk. One of the reasons I came to Congress for 2 reasons. Because I had a great gig in the Texas Senate. It was awesome. The closest thing to royalty we have in this country. And only 31 of us, and it was lovely. But anyhow, balance the budget, pushing a boulder up a hill, and securing the border. Well, President Trump did that. The border is more secure than it has been probably 50 years. So thank the president for that. If we aren't safe, then we're not free. The first thing you should do, and I'm all for zero-based budgeting, the very first thing any nation state should be funding is their defense. You have to secure the domestic. What does it say in the Constitution about any foe, whether foreign or domestic, right? So we need to do that. That's where you start. And then everything else is less important. I find it interesting that the Only thing that I've ever, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Democrats seem to be willing to cut in a federal budget is defense. Everything else they want to grow in perpetuity and out of control. So we just need to get more physically responsible in that regard. Can we find $500 billion? I don't know. That's going to be tough, right? And the deficit is way too high year over year, which now is what the debt's. You don't even really know. I think it's 38 trillion now. It's like it grows so much that you want to be accurate with the figure. But the way in which sometimes you can offset it in certain ways. DOGE was great, but the political will, the Democrats went nuts for a lot of different reasons because some of that funding was very incestuous because we would be spending gobs of money on these NGOs and we would give them federal money because but the NGO would do things that with the federal money, if we did it, was illegal. It was that insane. And then they would donate to Democrats or Democratic aligned groups, and then they would pay all their Democratic. It was crazy the way it worked. But you can find tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions with that. We also have a massive fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm on the DOGE subcommittee. We're on the right track, and then we lost a lot of steam. So that's one way with efficiencies. Also, believe it or not, when you lower tax burdens, the economy grows, and when the economy grows, your tax revenues increase, and their coffers get filled. We had surpluses in the 90s, and it wasn't because Bill Clinton was in the White House. It was in spite of his presence there. It was because the internet hit. And that's kind of one of those inventions that happens every 500 years or so. Movable type, the internet. Now we have AI. Now we have, in the area, we're talking quantum and things of that nature. Responsible economists think that our economy is going to grow 1 additional % just because of AI and certain technologies we have. And we did hit some very good numbers in the second and third quarter. We were cooking with gas. I think that's going to happen again over the next several quarters. So that will narrow that gap. And then you just have to, the only way you're going to fix the budget is you're going to have to talk about mandatory spending. You're not going to do it with, the other discretionary. You have to do it with mandatory. And nobody seems to want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So that's the way you can do both.
Yeah, there were, I remember in the presidential campaign, there were only 2 candidates who spoke about it, and unfortunately they didn't.
No, you don't go very far.
Yeah,
when
you don't
talk
go
about
very
that.
far.
Because we're addicted also to getting $1 worth of services and paying 80 cents for it.
I'll do one more question because I saw Meredith had her hand up, and so sorry, I'll just hand this back to you. Sorry about that.
Meredith Ryman, CSIS 18. What is the conversation like in your district about trade, also among the Republicans at this point? Is there any change since the Supreme Court decision? Is there enough certainty out there with all of these?
That's a great question. Every business owner I talk to from the 4th District around Texas or anywhere else for that matter, they want that, and there's a great desire and need for certainty. They'll even say, someone will say, I understand why the president's doing what he's doing. We just want to know, is this the landscape moving forward for the next year or two? Or is it going to shift? Because they're paying more in a lot of instances for goods. And they want trade deals to be done. And the president was able to cut a lot of trade deals that lessen that impact. But yeah, listen, if you want to talk about real policy and politics are intertwined, if we're going to want to hold the House and the Senate in the midterms, we've got to provide that stability. We've got to provide that certainty, and we've got to solve once and for all tariffs. And the strategy could have been on the genius level brilliant if they had taken an approach more of, let's isolate China via tariffs, right? Let's hit them. We're going to get into a little bit of spat with them from an economic and trade perspective, and then let's cut deals with everybody around them. And we did that in larger, Japan, Vietnam, the EU, Britain, and many others. And really, that would have been a clever way. And it was done 3/4 of the way, I think, was done that way. But so that's what they're talking about. And the rest of the 4th District, they just won't be left alone, live their lives. They're for limited government, low taxes, reasonable regulation, fiscal responsibility, that kind of thing. And how about this? Personal responsibility.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you, everyone, for coming out and listening. Once again, this is our Future of Conservative Foreign Policy series where we try to highlight those members of Congress who are really helping to update American national security for today's threat environment. So thank you for
thank you all again. And if I could, just in the interest of Coach Holtz leaving us yesterday, one time I was a junior in college and he had the team in, it was spring ball. and he had us come in. There's about 100 guys on the team. And he had us come in. We sat in the team auditorium. And he didn't talk about X's and O's at all. He didn't talk about football. He didn't talk about practice. He didn't talk about the impending season. For whatever reason, that day, he talked to us about how much we owe the people that raised us. And he said, and whoever that is, if it's both your parents, if your mom, it's your dad, if it's your grandmother, if whoever raised you. For an hour, he talked to us about that importance with the mission, I think, and the goal of having us immediately thereafter write a letter to that person or persons. And I remember I had no intention. I was a cool 19-year-old kid. I had muscles. I had a 32-inch waist. I had a lot more hair. I was fast and I was sexy. And I had to talk to some friends of mine, some ladies, and I could go home to my dorm room and write a letter to my mom? Like that, if you had told me that was going to happen when I walked into that meeting. 45 minutes after that meeting, I was in my dorm room and penned my mama a 5-page letter, and it was a little moist because there were tears falling from my eyes. It worked. That's who he was. He had an ability and a talent to motivate. Some would say manipulate. When you were 19, he was manipulating us. Now, in my 50s, I realized he was motivating us to always do the right thing. And for those that have mamas and daddies around, give them a call. Write them an old-fashioned letter. Put a pen to paper that you touched and put it in the mail, because they're going to read it and they're going to love on it and they're going to appreciate it. And you know what else your parents are going to do with it? They're going to save it. And you're going to warm their hearts. So if you could do me and Coach Holtz that favor tonight, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much.